Chapter 7, The Aftermath. Shortly after the war ended, Mom and Dad were extremely anxious for us girls to come home, but it wasn't quite that simple. Nobody could go from the French zone into the American zone without a valid pass, and this was almost impossible to get. Dad apparently knew a truck driver who went back and forth with produce, and he was willing to smuggle Renata and me on one of his runs. Very early in the morning, my cousin Genel dropped us off at the edge of the wooded area. As the truck driver loaded the produce, he packed us two between the crates, way in the back of the truck. "I will make only one stop," the driver told us, "and that will be at the border, so please don't move or breathe." I was almost sure the border guard could hear my heartbeat. I was so scared. I don't recall any more where we were dropped off, but most likely near the small village of Weissenhorn, 28 kilometers south of Ulm. Again, figure out how many miles that is. To my recollection, Dad was waiting for us to take us into his arms. A long and difficult separation has ended. Renata and I returned to a life very different from the one we had left. Our family had lost everything in the 1944 bombing of Ulm. After we lost our entire home and most of Dad's business, we found refuge in Weisenhorn. Dad's brother Franz and his daughter Bertel lived there and owned a cigar shop in their home. The small village was untouched by the war, and the people opened their homes for the bombed-out victims. Moody and Papa were offered one bedroom and a living room furnished with 2-burner hot plate to make meals for the 4 of us. 4 blocks from there, Dad rented a bedroom for Renata and I with a washbowl and pitcher and no heat. That winter I'll never forget. At night, Dad walked the 2 of us to our bedroom, and I can still feel how cold the comforter was. It seemed it never warmed up. In the morning, we found ice crystals in our water bowl. In record time, we washed up, got dressed, and made the beds, and ran up to Mom's living room for breakfast. Dad was feeding the wood-burning stove. Soon after that, we took our daily trip to the train station to go to school. What I remember most of the time, I was always cold. Taking the trains was anything but pleasant. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the little heat that came from the steam locomotive was barely noticeable. Many times we stood on the platform and everybody just huddled together. Then, when we arrived in Ulm, the walk to the high school was long and very depressing. The city was totally destroyed, and we passed nothing but burned-out houses, ruins of torn-up streets. Our high school could not be used because the damage was too extensive. We had our classrooms in different locations, barricades, and other empty buildings. It was a difficult time in my life. I was 17 years old already, had no personal possessions, and of course, no social life. Mom still had a very hard time to put food on the table. In fact, Dad traded in an Oriental rug, which was in storage before we lost our home, for 1 dozen eggs and 2 pounds of cheese. While our family life was grim, indeed Papa's business life was no better. Dad's company was almost totally destroyed by the bombing, the same night we lost our home. The administration building was the only one saved. To make things more complicated, after the American troops occupied Ulm, several dozen soldiers took refuge in our building and destroyed all the papers and files. I don't recall how long the fighting soldiers were stationed in our building. After they left, Dad was able to survey the damage and start with the cleanup. After nearly 2 years of commuting from Weisenhorn to Ulm, Dad could move his family back to the city in 1947. Dad realized it would take a long time to rebuild, but his hopes and dreams were that Werner would take over sometime. In fact, he convinced Werner to take up chemistry at the university. We did not have to worry about the future, really, because the biggest blow was yet to come. In 1936, before the war, my father purchased the tannery company from 2 Jewish brothers for an amount over 1 million marks. One gentleman emigrated to the United States. They were well aware and concerned about Hitler's anti-Semitism. The other brother did not want to leave, so Dad offered him an executive apartment above the administration building. Unfortunately, one day, the Gestapo caught up with him and arrested him. Dad risked his own life to plead for his release, and during the night, Dad drove him to the Swiss border and helped him to escape. None of us, even Mom, had any knowledge of it until the war was over. The gentleman who escaped to Switzerland, thanks to Dad's courageous deed, returned and announced to the German government that he wanted the company back. I don't recall all the details. The government was extremely eager and bent over backwards to rehabilitate and did not question any demands. Unfortunately, the purchase agreement papers, etc., were lost at City Hall because everything was burned to the ground during the bombing. Dad had no proof of ownership. I had an extremely hard time to write about that time in my life. I have started this paragraph over and over again in my mind, and the tears make me walk away from it. One morning in 1948, the police arrived with some papers, and under police escort, we were ordered to move out. On the day we moved, the police were graciously and conspicuously hidden from the activity. As some of Dad's employees wanted to shake hands with him, he had big tears in his eyes and walked away. Even his employees were in disbelief and could not hide their emotions. They loved and respected their boss, who stood by them through good times and hard times. I remember little, but there was no big exchange of money. Once again, we were homeless, and most of all, Dad's life, work, and money were completely taken away from him. A great deal later, Mom told us Dad wanted to die, but the love for his 3 children kept on going. All this could not have happened at a worse time. In 1948, we experienced a devaluation of the money. Every citizen of Germany had to turn in all their current money, the Reichsmark, and in return received per head a measly 80 DMs. So whether you were a street bum or a millionaire, you started out with 80 marks. I still remember all the long lines at the banks, but I am sure the impact did not settle in with us youngsters. The people with the business survived a great deal better. For example, the baker could bake his bread and sell it, but for Dad, I am sure it must have been a nightmare and absolutely devastating. These were the darkest days of my father's life. At nearly 60 years of age, he saw his world crumble. He must have experienced anger, disappointment, worry, outrage, but we children never saw any of it. He was always in control, a trait that brought him much respect from many people. We loved him very much, and we always felt safe. Sad chapter, huh?